Does anyone have any questions about things that we've talked about in our previous evening discussions? All right. Well, then we'll just continue on more or less from where we left off last night, which we had talked about the purification of virtue, which is the first of the three parts of the Eightfold Path. And we had also begun speaking about the purification of mind, or the meditation section of the Eightfold Path. We had talked about right effort and right mindfulness and right concentration. So, of course, meditation is where we develop our concentration and mindfulness. And they are a very important part of the path, as we've already discussed, and as I think has already become quite clear to everyone. Because until you have the ability to focus your attention and control your mind somewhat, it's very difficult to examine yourself and to examine the reality that you live in a way that is going to lead to insight. And in addition to that, you need a very strong mindful awareness that is developed in meditation. So, you all are familiar from the handout and from previous discussions with 10 stages of meditation. And generally, it's at the seventh stage when a person has single-pointedness, even though it may not be effortless, that they can really begin to achieve some significant progress in insight, in gaining insight, by having direct experiences through the focused, concentrated, highly aware mind. The specific insights that we need to have a deep understanding of in order to achieve awakening are insights into the three characteristics of phenomena, which are their impermanence, their selflessness, or lack of any sort of self-nature, and the third is that attachment and clinging to them in any way, because they are impermanent and because they lack a self-nature, only leads to suffering. So these are the insights that meditation is preparing us to be able to understand. And so that brings us to the third major part of the Eightfold Path, which is right view and right understanding. So all of these parts of the path work together, but right view and right understanding. We talked a little bit about the purification of view, which is coming to understand that, or first of all, right view is looking at yourself and the world and your experience from a more realistic, empirical point of view, rather than from the way that we usually do, which is recognizing that your life consists of a series of experiences that you have, rather than a world of things and a thing that occupies that. And then understanding nama and rupa, mentality and materiality, understanding the five aggregates. And all of that is a purification of view. We talked about craving and its role in producing suffering. So right view is realizing that all the other beings that you come in contact with are suffering beings. And all of the things that they do, all of the acts that they commit, are being committed out of ignorance and as their attempt to escape from their own suffering and to find some pleasure and happiness in life. And so when you understand that they are all exactly the way you are, struggling in this way, then this tends to give rise to compassion and understanding. So even though people may do things that harm us and that hurt us, if we recognize where that's coming from, that it's out of ignorance, and also with what we understand about the 5 aggregates and about karma, we realize that they're actually harming themselves even more than they are harming us. And so this may make it easier for us to treat them with patience and understanding and compassion, rather than harming ourselves by becoming angry and aversive and filled with ill will instead. So this attitude of compassion and understanding that comes out of the fundamental recognition of the suffering nature of humans and the role that craving and ignorance plays in that is very important. So, which brings us then to the, when you have right view and right understanding, applying these and really bringing the understanding through its own perfection comes through insight. Because that's the only thing that can help us break through our own our own ignorance that we're trapped in. So what that means in terms of those 3 characteristics, when we first understand that everything is impermanent, this begins to move us in the right direction. Then we examine not so the non-self nature of ourselves in the way that we talked about before. What we need to do is to be able to go from that being a sort of an intellectual understanding to be a direct realization that, wow, in fact, this self is just a fabrication. It's just a mental construct. It's just an idea. It's just a concept. So that you really and truly know that, even though at that point things continue to seem to be the way they have before, that there's a self behind all of this. So that's the things that we've talked about quite a bit up to now. The other aspect of it that we really didn't go into is that it's not just our self that is a fabrication and an illusion. And the thing is that when you realize that the self that you thought you were doesn't really exist, and that what you are is best described as the 5 aggregates, then there's a tendency to start having the thinking that just the 5 aggregates, I'm just my mind, and I'm just my brain, and that's just materiality, and so this seems like a dreadful realization. It's a materialistic nihilism. Nihilism, everything becomes meaningless and pointless. I'm just this freaky accident of nature that happened when matter got together in a particular way. And that's very discouraging, and that's not uplifting at all. But that is a very... You can only have that idea, and you can only have that conception so long as you're still mired in ignorance. Because what you've done is you've said, oh, my precious self doesn't really exist, but everything else does, and everything else is just matter. And that's what makes it a problem. And the truth is that all of this that we perceive is just as much a fabrication. It's just as much a product of our mind as our self is. In other words, everything is empty of a self-nature, just as empty of a self-nature as we are. So we didn't have much chance to talk about emptiness, but that's where the emptiness aspect of it comes in. Is we aren't reducing ourselves to just some strange fluke of materiality. We're breaking that strong attachment that we have to the psychological attachment to the belief in self as being substantially real. But we're not reducing ourselves in that way to just materiality, because all of the materiality that we experience, the world as we experience, is also of that same nature. It's also empty of any kind of self-existence. It also has the same origin. It has the same origin as a projection of our mind, arising out of our mental formations. And so that is the reason that we, if we understand that we will not fall into the wrong view of nihilism and materialism. So what happens when a person awakens is that the result of a person awakening is that they know absolutely with deep certainty the emptiness of the self and the emptiness of all phenomena. And the way that they know that is because the event that brings about their awakening is that the mind, for a short time, ceases its fabrication. You get to the point in your practice where the mind stops creating the illusion. And so in that moment, you experience the true nature of reality. You experience the ultimate truth. And that is what makes the difference, because in ultimate truth, there is no self, and you have the direct experience of that and the direct realization of that. And in ultimate reality, all of this is empty, and you have the direct experience of that. So even though after that experience and thereafter, you still continue your mind still continues to project a world and to project a self, you can't ever really be fooled by it in the same way again. It's like, does everyone know the story of the Wizard of Oz? Everyone know Wizard? You don't know the story of Wizard of Oz? Oh. Well, it's a popular American children's story about a little girl named Dorothy and her dog Toto. And there's a tornado, and they get picked up and carried to a different world. It's filled with witches and magical beings, and they meet a Tin Man and a Scarecrow and a lion. And they go on this great search. But anyway, Dorothy, of course, wants to go home. Her companions, the Tin Woodman wants a heart, and the Scarecrow wants a brain, and the lion wants courage. So they've all got their quests. So they go in search of the Wizard of Oz, and they will go where the Wizard of Oz great temple or palace is, and there's this huge booming voice and lights that flash and all sorts of fantastic things that happen, and this huge powerful voice booms out and says, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" And, it's all very impressive. But as the story goes on, the reason I mentioned it, there's a certain point in the story where they get behind the curtain and they see that the wizard isn't this super being that it sounded like. It's just this little bald pot-bellied man back there, with a big loudspeaker and some controls to make great things happen. Right? And the point is, once they'd seen behind the curtain, they could no longer believe in the wizard, right? And that's what we're after, is to get to that place where we've seen behind the curtain, and the curtain is our mind's projections. And so we need to see behind the curtain just for a moment, and then that will forever free us from being caught by those illusions again, because we know them for what they are. We know what's behind them. So that is the goal of awakening. That is the goal that results in the awakening. And it's an awakening because then we awaken from the dream that we have lived in, which has been the cause of our dissatisfaction, to the reality, which, is much better than the dream.
So I think the modern day equivalent is the movie The Matrix.
The Matrix, yes, right, yes.
Which
Probably everyone knows the movie The Matrix, yes, right. This whole world is generated by a computer, and what lies behind it is, so yeah, that's yes, you're right. That's the modern version. But still, somehow the Wizard of Oz gets the idea of what gets the idea of Oz.
Well, it only takes one look to achieve first fruition, and how many looks does it take to become fully enlightened?
Now that's a very good question. Okay, the question, the question is, okay, so if it takes one look to get to the first stage, the stream entry, how many looks does it take to become enlightened, to become fully enlightened? And that's good. That's what we need to talk about next, I think. So just to clarify this, and also to relate this back to where we originally started with the issue of craving. To truly be free from suffering, you have to eliminate this tendency you were born with to crave in reaction to all pleasant and unpleasant experiences. And of course, as you've noticed, if you have been mindful of feelings, pleasant and unpleasant feelings are constantly arising. It's not just the really big pleasant and unpleasant feelings that are driving this, it's all of the pleasant and unpleasant feelings. So to get beyond suffering, we need to get beyond this innate compulsion that arises in response to all pleasant and unpleasant experience. And the other thing that we talked about is that this craving it has its support in the ignorant belief in the self. And so really going from the first stage of enlightenment to full enlightenment is a story of changes that take place in terms of craving and in terms of the attachment and the belief in the self. So there's 4 stages of enlightenment. And the very first stage is called stream entry. And that's what happens with the first time you get to look behind the curtain. And the effect that it has, of course, as I said, is that although you will go back to experiencing things as if they are real, you're never fooled by them in the same way. And you go back to experiencing this sense of self as though it is real, and you never really get fooled by it anymore. But you keep having the experiences of there is a self. So I should just I'll give it to you straight from the source what this enlightenment stuff is about. That's not the page. Where did it go? This must be. That's not the page. Oh my goodness. Just give me a moment here.
Take all the time you want.
All right. Thank you. Okay, there are 4 stages of enlightenment, and they're defined in terms of the overcoming of 10 different fetters. You know what I mean by fetters? All right, so there are these 10 fetters that we have that need to be overcome. These 10 are let's see. An untaught ordinary man lives with his heart possessed and enslaved by attachment to the view of self, by uncertainty, that's doubt about, it's referring specifically to doubt about the ultimate nature of things, doubt about the Dharma, doubt about enlightenment, doubt about the Buddha's teaching, uncertainty about what happens when a person dies, uncertainty about all these kinds of questions. That's the second. By misapprehension of the efficacy of rules, rites, and rituals, the ordinary man tends to be, in some cases, superstitiously attached to rules and rites and rituals. But even somebody who is not terribly superstitious still tends to have a strong belief that in the power and efficacy of things that are basically entirely within the realm of illusion. And that's rules, rites, and rituals are our attempt to manipulate reality through behaving. You know, when we talked last night about virtue, the belief that, well, if I follow these rules, then somehow or another, some other power, some power outside of yourself and your own mind, is going to produce particular results. That's an attachment to rules. If I break the rules, some power outside of myself is going to punish me. So that's attachment, and it's very, very common. Even the most non-superstitious kind of people still have a strong tendency to believe in that. And then rites and rituals are very strong. So this is the third fetter. The fourth is desire for worldly pleasures, for sense pleasures. The fifth is ill will and aversion, hatred, all forms of negative craving. So those are the first five, and they are an important group by themselves. So if you just review them so that you can remember them, they are the belief in the self, and it's interesting that the Buddha put it very clearly, enslavement to the belief in the self. Because that's really the way it works. This idea of self enslaves us to we're always trying to act as though it was an inner ego God. The second is doubt. The third is the belief in the efficacy of rules, rites, and rituals. The fourth is desire in all of its forms. and the fifth is ill will in all of its
So
forms.
desire in all kinds of, in all forms.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it's only sensual pleasure, but
Well, yes. There is one kind of desire. That's what we're coming up to in the next fetters. There's one type of desire that is not included in the fifth.
okay.
Okay. The second set of five. The first set of five. The first three of those are eliminated when somebody reaches the first stage of enlightenment, called stream entry, and the next two are eliminated when a person reaches the third stage. The last five are eliminated when the person reaches the fourth stage of arhatship, becomes like the Buddha. So this last five, the last ones to be overcome to reach the fourth stage of enlightenment, these are the last desires. They are desire for existence in the formless realm or the form realm. And for those of you that don't know what that means, this world we live in is called the desire realm, or the sense realm. But there are two other realms that a person experiences in the deepest states of meditative concentration, called the jhanas in Pali, or jhanas in Sanskrit. So you may know them by this name, jhana or jhana. And there's 4 form absorptions. These are states of meditation, very deep states of meditation, characterized by they're very refined, characterized by great happiness and bliss. And then there are 4 more, even more refined states that are called the formless dhyanas or jhanas. So someone who has reached the third stage of enlightenment but has not yet become a Buddha still has a craving for existence in these more refined realms of existence. So those are the first 2 of these fetters, is craving for existence in the form realm and craving for existence in the formless realm. The third is the conceit, I am. The fourth is restlessness. And the fifth is ignorance.
So restlessness is the third?
In this, yes, and needs a little bit of explanation. All 5 of these have to do with the same thing. They have to do with still being subject to the inherent sense of I, the sense of I am. So when the person reaches the first stage of enlightenment, they overcome their belief in and their attachment to the view that there is a self. But they still continue to experience this sense of I am, this sense of separate existence. And even as their wisdom becomes more and more refined, so that they don't believe in any of the ideas associated with the self anymore, they still have this feeling of being a separately existent being. There is still somehow an existence that is separate from everything else. And so
last one, I'm sorry.
What?
Very last one you said. You said I am restlessness
and ignorance.
Ignorance.
And ignorance. So that
sounds very wrong.
The ignorance referred to is that these things are all 5 really the same thing. The ignorance referred to, and the conceit I am, and the desire for existence in these higher realms, they're the same thing. The being still feels like they are they still feel separate, and by feeling separate, feeling that they exist separately, they want to continue their existence. And even though they're disenchanted with the sense realm, there's still a craving to continue their existence. So naturally, they will crave to continue their existence in these highest realms. because they still have a sense that I am. And that is the ignorance. And that is what causes the restlessness. They've overcome, the restlessness corresponds to the dissatisfaction and suffering that we experience because we still tend to believe in self and we're still subject to craving. The person, when they reach the third stage, they still have this sense I am, but there is no more craving except the craving associated with this craving to continue to exist. And so our craving causes us to experience dissatisfaction and suffering. The craving of a person on the third stage of the path, their craving for continued existence manifests as restlessness. So they don't experience suffering the way that we do. But they are not totally at peace. They have an inner restlessness. Does that explain it?
Thank you.
That the restlessness there? So restlessness is like a very, very subtle form of suffering, a very, very subtle form of dissatisfaction because you're still craving for existence. In spite of all the wisdom that has been acquired up to that stage.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said that you equated arhatship with like a Buddha.
Yes.
And so, this might be, my view of Buddhism is pretty limited to what I've learned at Shilai Temple plus what I've read. And what I understand from Shilai Temple is that there's arhats who kind of have a practice that's more solitary and purification based.
Yeah.
And there's bodhisattvas who are reaching out and connecting and helping.
That's right.
And then there's Buddha. So it's kind of in that order in terms of how enlightened you are.
Yeah.
And so what say you? Does that fit anything, or did I get it wrong?
No, you didn't. Let me explain that to you. There is an interesting thing here that will come up. But okay, an arhat. The Buddha was an arhat, and so and Buddha means fully awakened one. Now, all arhats are Buddhas in that sense. So an arhat is the highest stage of enlightenment. You can't be more enlightened than an arhat. You can't be more awakened than an arhat. Okay? Now, the person that we refer to as the Buddha, as opposed to all these other Buddhas that have come along, all these other arhats, the Buddha is a Sammasambuddha. So he's different than all the other arhats. But not that he is more awakened. Because according to the sutras, according to the teaching of the Buddha himself, you can't be more awakened than to be an arhat. An arhat is completely without any sense of self at all, and has totally removed the last vestiges of ignorance. And it's not possible to be more awakened than that, according to the original texts and teachings of the Buddha himself. But the same texts say the Buddha was different than these other arhats, because how come everybody that didn't become an arhat as a result of the Buddha's teaching become just as powerful a teaching as he did? And that is because he is a Sammasambuddha, and that's, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sammasambuddha.
Yes.
Right. So he is a Sammasambuddha, which means he is the most Sammasam means like the most of the most, sort of, the most. Yeah. And how he came to be a Sammasambuddha is that he spent countless lifetimes, over many eons, being reborn over and over again, purifying in his virtue. And as a result of all of that very long period of purification, he in his when he was born in the lifetime where he became the Sammasambuddha, as a result of that purification, he also acquired the power to teach the Dharma and to bring every other kind of being into enlightenment. So in other words, he's not more awakened than any other arhat, but he has some special powers and abilities that they don't have. And there's a lot of arhats that they could never teach anybody to meditate, you know. Or it's because it's not one of the things that their past karma gave them the ability to do.
He knows how to teach it.
So he's a Sammasambuddha as a result of all these lifetimes. Now, when a little over 500 years after the time of the Buddha, between 500 and 800 years after the time of the Buddha, there arose this new approach to Buddhism that's called the Mahayana.
Yeah.
And it calls itself the Mahayana, which means great vehicle, because the idea of Mahayana is that rather than trying to become enlightened for your own sake, you're going to try to become enlightened for the sake of all other beings. So, and the way it started out is well, that was a good idea. I'll just keep coming back, and I'll become a Sammasambuddha too. You know, and then there was a whole great thing emerged out of that, and so now there is, there are different Buddhas in different realms, and Amitabha or Amida is the coming Buddha, the future Buddha, the next Buddha. When the Dharma disappears from the world, Amitabha will appear as the next Sammasambuddha.
I thought that was Maitreya.
Or no, sorry, yes, you're right. That is my sorry.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you. Very good. Okay. Maitreya. Okay, yeah, yes. I'm sorry
That's
for
on the
that.
tape, right?
That's right. I do get words, names especially mixed up, Jerry, so you'll have to forgive me. So anyway, and so now the situation is that Maitreya is in his Buddha paradise waiting for the day when he's due to come, and there's others. But anyway, as in the Mahayana tradition, what we do is we take as our goal to become enlightened for the sake of all other beings. So we want to become Sammasambuddhas so that we can bring all beings to enlightenment.
So was the Buddha, before he was Sammasambuddha, was he a regular Buddha? And then he kind of went back for more and more and more and more, and then he's a Sammasambuddha?
No, he was not. And this was never quite explained by the Buddha and the Buddha's life. But later on, the explanation was, no, what he did is he deferred his final enlightenment on purpose so that he would become a Sammasambuddha. Okay. Anyway, this continued to evolve, and at first it was very noble and very inspiring that, instead of striving to become enlightened for my own sake, I'll become enlightened for all other beings. And this is very useful. It's very motivating. It will keep you on the path. It'll give you an extra reason. And it gives rise to very powerful teaching about compassion and helps people to put more focus on developing compassion. And then those people that called themselves Mahayana, they were in the same monasteries with all the other people that have been practicing the same tradition, but they started calling the others Hinayana, lesser vehicle. And then they started saying some things that are ridiculous that you will hear, but when you think about them and if you read about things and become more familiar with the Dharma, you realize how ridiculous they are. One of them is that you'll hear it said in the Mahayana tradition that to become an arhat is selfish, right? And that arhats are selfish beings. Well, they have completely transcended any sense of self.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a silly thing. Anyway, so this is a wonderful, good idea, an effective teaching for inspiring people, and produced a great growth and expansion in Buddhist teaching in many areas. The Mahayana is very wonderful. But of course, some people were saying, well, I don't know if I really want to spend countless eons being reborn.
How many years is an eon?
Huh?
How many years is an eon?
Forever.
It's
Next to forever? So
an eon is
it's almost forever.
an eon is made up of kalpas, and a kalpa is made up of something else, and that's made up of something else.
So it's almost like
The smallest
it's more than
unit-
trillions of years.
the smallest unit is like 100,000 years, and the next level up is 108,000 years, and the next level up is like 100,000 times that, and the next level up. So I mean, it's some just absolutely astronomical number of years, older than scientists say the universe is. So.
Well, this explains something that I never understood at the temple. Because they kept saying, well, a bodhisattva chooses to delay his enlightenment so that he can help others.
Mhm.
And my immediate question was, so doesn't that make a Buddha out to be kind of a chump? Because he chooses to delay. And so I could never get an explanation.
See, they want to make out all of the other arhats out to be chumps, while they're all, going to become Buddhas. So
Bodhisattva delays so that when he finally is enlightened, he's enlightened to the type of Buddha that can teach others, as opposed to just someone that is fully enlightened and
right.
got it all figured out.
And how did they enlighten it anyways? I mean, when you see the truth, you see the truth. You can't, manipulate that, the timing of it.
Well, but you've got to understand, a lot of this teaching is unsophisticated. It's unsophisticated, and it's popular. So, okay, what it does is it creates different levels of Buddhist practitioners. It creates Buddhist practitioners who are bodhisattvas, and they're striving to ascend through the different bodhisattva levels, so that, when they get to the highest level, then they will go and they will acquire their own Buddha realm, and they'll wait in that Buddha heaven until the time is right for them to.
But I think that's just one definition of bodhisattva, because I've heard many other definitions of bodhisattva, and looked at bodhisattva vows and stuff too. So that's one.
Well, that is what I was taught there.
Yeah, no.
Trust me, there's lots.
Throughout the sutras, the term bodhisattva is used, and that's anybody who is bent on achieving enlightenment. So all of the people that in these books who become arhats were bodhisattvas first.
Oh, okay.
They were all bodhisattvas. And
Bodhisattvas, you're not enlightened. You're not even first version.
no, that's not true. The bodhisattva.
Oh, is anybody?
Okay, and so in the Mahayana, keep in mind, this is all stuff that was generated thousands of years or more after the time of the Buddha. They come up with these bodhisattva levels, or bhumis, they're levels, of which most commonly they speak of 10, but there's 12, there's 18, there's different systems of levels. And usually they will say that the first bodhisattva level corresponds to stream entry. But if you look at the actual definition of it, it's really the third bodhisattva level that corresponds to what the Buddha himself called stream entry, or the first level of enlightenment. But, these are just theologies between different different churches. And even if you look at No, from the point of view of ultimate truth, none of this stuff makes sense, right? From the point of view of the teaching on ultimate truth, including the Mahayana teaching, all the higher Mahayana teachings, when you understand them and you look at all this stuff is obviously a kind of, all you can say is it's a metaphor or an analogy or a teaching tool, because it has no possible reality in terms of ultimate truth, in terms of the ultimate truth of enlightenment, in terms of emptiness. So I'd say don't get caught up in it. Enjoy it. It's
But I give tours.
That's why I told you when to the Dharma drum. Don't go to the
What? That was wrong.
yeah, Dharma drum is it for.
Well, I'm just trying to get through a tour. So, in the Mahayana belief,
yes.
is a bodhisattva a higher level of awakening or whatever than an arhat?
No. The bodhisattvas, until the 10th and highest level of bodhisattva, they're all lower levels of enlightenment.
Than an arhat.
And there's sort of a dispute: does 1 to 10 go from stream enterer first stage to third stage to fourth stage, or is it from 3 to 10 that goes? Yeah.
So you're saying a 10th stage bodhisattva is equivalent to an arhat?
For the enlightenment.
Well, it's no. 10th level is equivalent to an arhat in every way except that he or she has not released themselves fully into the, it's called the nirvana without residue.
Right.
Okay? So you might think of them as being just on the borderline, but not quite an arhat, because according to the Mahayana tradition, once you become an arhat, then you can never come back and save the world.
Okay.
So 10th level bodhisattva has all, and I know, they have all the perfections, but there's somehow one little thread that keeps them. Oh, I remember what it is. The thread that keeps them in is their vow. That's right. It is their vow. That's what keeps them from.
I always thought the thread that kept them in was their desire to help others.
That is the vow.
So if there's others,
That's right.
then you have to be separate.
That's right. You have to be separate. Exactly. Yeah. The only way you can save others is to be.
There are others.
You have to be not other. You have to be the not other.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
But anyway, let's go back to the four stages here, and what the Buddha had to say about it. Okay. He said, there are bhikkhus who, with the exhaustion of the first 3 fetters, and the first 3 fetters are attachment to the belief in self, doubt, and belief in the efficacy of rules, rites, and rituals. Okay? So, bhikkhus who have exhausted the first 3 fetters have entered the stream. Their stream entrance. That's the first stage of enlightenment. They are no more subject to perdition. They are certain of rightness and destined to enlightenment. Next, secondly, there are bhikkhus who, with the exhaustion of the 3 fetters and the attenuation of desire and ill will and delusion, are once returners, returning once to this world. They will make an end of suffering. Okay, so the second stage of enlightenment, it's usually called the once returner, is they've completely rid of the first 3 fetters, and the next 2 fetters are hugely diminished. but still present. They still have craving. They still have sense, desire, and aversion, but it's very weak. Okay.
How weak is very weak? Is everything's relative?
How weak is very weak?
Yeah. Can you give a concrete example?
Okay. Well, a concrete example is that a once returner will still feel the arising of irritation and ill will, or still feel the arising of desire, but it has no great force, and it's very easily set aside. And the way I would describe it is though it's become weak and timid, and it's still there, but it used to be in charge, and it's no longer. When a once returner is confronted with very, very powerful sources of desire that they were conditioned to in their life, or very, very powerful sources of hatred that they were profoundly conditioned to, like if a once returner had a terrible, painful childhood that was due to a particular person, and they hated that person for most of their life, then in the contact with a person, there's still going to be ill will arising, right? But it won't overwhelm them. It will come up, but it won't have the strength. Okay, and then
Won't
still
have a judgment.
That's right. Their judgment will. Yes, their judgment will still remain clear. They may experience the ill will, and they may focus their mindfulness on it, and it may cause them to suffer somewhat, but they won't succumb to it. Okay. So that's the second stage of enlightenment, called the once returner. And then there are bhikkhus who, with the destruction of the first five fetters, are destined to reappear spontaneously elsewhere, and will there finally attain nirvana, never returning meanwhile from that world. These are called the non-returners. This is the third stage of enlightenment. So they have completely eliminated sense, desire, and aversion. And so they are free from every kind of suffering that is caused by desire and aversion, except for the restlessness, which was number 9, that still exists because of their craving for existence in these higher realms. And that was the 6th and 7th fetters, right? And that craving for existence in these higher realms is there because of the 8th fetter, which is the sense I am. Okay. So that's the third level. And they're called the non-returner because supposedly if they don't become fully enlightened in this lifetime, they still won't be reborn in the sense realm. They have craving to be reborn in the form or formless realms. So they are reborn in in another realm, and they will achieve their full enlightenment in this other realm without coming back to this one. So that's why they're called non-returners. All right, and then there are bhikkhus who are arhats with taints exhausted, who have lived out the life, done what was to be done, laid down the burden, reached the highest goal, destroyed the fetters of being, and who are completely liberated through final knowledge. So that's the fourth stage, the arhat. Okay? So now if we look at these in terms of craving and the and self, so we see that, and I mentioned to you this before, and I'll just remind you of it. This the self that we experience, there's two aspects. One is the idea, the concept, the mental construct, the idea of who we are and what we are, and that our ego revolves around. And that's all conceptual and ideational. It's that kind of mental construct. And the other part of it is the inherent sense I am. Just that feeling of existing separately from everything else. So these are the two aspects of self. And so the first one, the attachment to the conceptual view of self, is lost when a person has that first experience of nirvana and of ultimate reality and see the way things really are. Then they are free of that. But they still have the inherent sense I am until they become an arhat. Because the last 5 fetters are about that sense I am. Okay? With regard to craving, the stream entrant at the first stage has overcome doubt, self-view, and belief in rites and rituals, but it doesn't say anything about them overcoming desire and aversion. So the stream enterer is still subject to desire and aversion, except that they know better. They have, and they know better because they are stream entrants. And they also have the power of mindfulness that got them to become stream entrants. So what will happen because of desire and aversion, and because they have these habits of behavior, they may still engage in behaviors that are unwholesome, and they may still experience suffering. But with the difference that the unwholesome behaviors that they engage in won't be of a terribly serious nature, and they will tend to very quickly realize and recognize that they are engaging in unwholesome behaviors, and then they will do something, they will cease to do the unwholesome behavior, and they will make amends, do their best to make amends. Yes?
You said some people, they achieve this by accident. Actually everybody achieve this by accident, but some people without even meditating, they achieve this. So not necessarily have they established the mindfulness foundation. So how can they be, so...
They will be at a disadvantage, yes.
They'll be at a disadvantage, so not necessarily will they recognize that they did something, they made a poor judgment on something.
Well, at some point, usually what, for somebody who has gone through a systematic process as well, for any stream entrant who engages in unwholesome behavior, it's because of a lapse in mindfulness. So the difference is that somebody who didn't go through the systematic training and doesn't have strong mindfulness will be more prone to lapses. But in either case, there is a lapse of mindfulness, and it will be the unwholesome behaviors cause harm to other beings and cause harm to oneself. So at some point or another, the person realizes that they're causing harm, and that's what rekindles their mindful awareness. And then knowing the emptiness of self and knowing the emptiness of phenomena, they can easily break the pattern. They can easily let go of it. And that's why it doesn't go very far. Right? And the same thing is true of suffering, because patterns of behavior and the fact that a person still is subject to desire and aversion, a stream entrant will still experience suffering, but never the kind of suffering that they did before, for exactly the same reason. They get into a mental, a mindset that is being driven by desire or aversion, and they begin to suffer, and the suffering doesn't get too far before they say, wait a minute, I don't have to let this happen anymore. And then the mindfulness comes, and they interrupt the process that is creating their suffering.
Wouldn't many people haven't achieved first fruition have these abilities, have the ability that you just described? They are mindful, they realize something's unwholesome, they stopped doing unwholesome things.
Yes, that's true.
It's just logical.
Well, yes, and that's right. It's completely logical. The only difference is, on the one hand, a question of degree, and on the other, the incredibly powerful tool that the stream entrant has when they find themselves in this situation is that they know the falseness of the sense of self that's driving this, and they know the falseness of the things that they are attached to or experience aversion towards. So it's through their knowledge of emptiness, of self and of things. This is a powerful tool that the person who's not a stream entrant doesn't have. Now, and this comes out, okay, how do you recognize a stream entrant?
Yeah, what's a bulletproof test?
What's the bulletproof test? Well, there really isn't a bulletproof test, but there's a, what would you call it, a bullet-resistant test? If someone is still strongly prone to behaviors that hurt other people and manifest them repeatedly, then for sure they're not a stream entrant. And a person who keeps miring themselves in suffering of their own making is definitely not a stream entrant.
Every suffering is from our own making.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that there was another kind. I was just pointing out that it is of their own making. So if you see somebody suffering, and if you know that like all suffering, it's of their own making, then you know this person's probably not a stream entrant, right?
Okay.
On the other hand, if you find somebody who is very non-harming and doesn't engage in unwholesome behaviors and is good in many ways, and who likewise is happy and things don't bother them too much, you can't say absolutely for sure that they are a stream entrant. They still might not be. Okay? But if they were a stream entrant, that's what you would expect to see, is that they are basically pretty mellow, not immune to suffering, not immune to mistakes and unwholesome activity, but pretty mellow and pretty virtuous.
And since all of us here are diligent practitioners, I wouldn't doubt within this lifetime, at least some of us here will achieve first liberation.
Well, I hope everybody here will pretty soon.
Well, I'm thinking, if everybody practices diligently as they have in the past 9 days, I think we all have like solid chances.
That's exactly.
So how do we examine, especially about the first part, our attachment to the view of the self? How do we know that we understand enough that there is no self?
Okay. How do you know yourself? Well,
Get Steve behind the curtain.
How do you know you see for sure behind the curtain?
Well, that is the problem, because if you've seen behind the curtain, you're sure you've seen behind the curtain, but you could also not have seen behind the curtain and still be sure that you have. So that's why there's uncertainty about it. So, because whether even if you haven't, you might think you have, and that is the problem. And the other thing is, it actually seems that there are some people who don't ever remember seeing behind the curtain, but they know what's behind the curtain. So how would you know? Well, the thing is that the only way anyone can know is it stands the test of time and circumstances. So if a meditator had an experience that they were sure that they'd seen behind the curtain, that they had an awakening experience, there are many different things that we could look at to make an educated guess. But the only way that person can know for sure, and that their teacher could know for sure, as it's certain, is to watch and see what kind of permanent change it's made in them that lasts over time.
Permanent change, just like the characteristic you described earlier.
It's a permanent change. So, but there's more to it than that. And let me go ahead and finish. Okay. So a person becomes a stream enterer we've talked about what's happened there, but they still have desire and aversion. When they become a once returner, when they reach the second stage, they have tremendously reduced desire and aversion, but they still have it. Now, your original question was, how many times, it was about, okay, this experience, it's called fruition. The first time is called path. When you have an experience of ultimate truth, and as a result of that experience, you have attained to the first path and become a stream entrant. And then if you have arrived at that experience by systematic practice, you can repeat it, in which case repeating the experience is called fruition, but it's the same thing. You're seeing ultimate truth again. And the more often that you do that, the better. Because for a stream entrant to become a once returner, they have to eliminate a lot of desire and aversion that they have, which is now possible because they're no longer attached to the view of self, which is why one has to come before the other. Now the view of self is gone. Now they can actually start destroying desire and aversion.
So they continue to improve their chances of keep seeing it because they keep improving their virtue and wisdom.
They keep improving their virtue and wisdom.
So
that's right.
The odds of getting hit by lightning over and over again becomes super, super likely.
Becomes what?
Super likely. Super duper likely.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Now somebody to happen to by accident might be kind of stuck in terms of reaching the next stage of enlightenment. Although what they would probably do is say, wow, I've got to figure out what's happened to me. I've got to learn more about this. And when they do, they'll take up meditation, and then they will be able to, they will acquire the necessary knowledge and skills to become
that's
one.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Why are you here?
But the once returner also has a path experience. At some point, all of this becomes mature. And then once again, they have an experience of ultimate truth. But this time, different than the previous experiences, which were first path fruition, now this is second path attainment. Okay? Now, it brings about a further deep, profound change in them. And so from this point on, desire and aversion are very weak, and they are once returner. Same process leading to the complete destruction of sense desire and ill will leads to a third path attainment experience, and then subsequent to that there would be third path fruition experiences, which then, proceeding there, eventually the third path person, the non-returner, they'll have a fourth path experience, and they will become an arhat. And then there will be no more learning, and the holy life will have been lived, the work that was to be done has been done, the goal has been fulfilled. But now we were talking, or there was some question about what's it like to be on the first path, to be a stream entrant with regard to the sense of self. And remember, with regard to the sense of self, the stream entrant, the once returner, and the non-returner are all exactly the same, because they have overcome the attachment to self-view, but they still experience the sense of existing separately. Right? So, now this particular description is by one of the disciples of Buddha, who was the elder Kemaka. And the elder Kemaka was a non-returner. He had attained to the third path. But he's describing how it is for him, and it would be exactly the same for a stream enterer or a once returner as it is for this non-returner. He says of himself, Elder Kamaka said, I do not see in these 5 categories, he means the 5 aggregates, in these 5 categories affected by clinging, any self or any self's property. Yet I am not an arahant with taints exhausted. On the contrary, I still have the attitude I am with respect to these 5 categories affected by clinging. Although I do not see I am this with respect to them. I do not say I am form, I am feeling, I am perception, I am formations, I am consciousness, nor do I say I am apart from these. Yet I still have the attitude I am with respect to the 5 categories. Although I still have the attitude I am with respect to the 5 categories, although I do not see I am this with respect to them. Okay? Although a noble disciple may have abandoned the first 5 fetters, still his conceit, I am, desire, I am, underlying tendency, I am, with respect to the 5 categories, is as yet unabolished. Later he abides contemplating rise and fall thus, such is form, such its origin, such its disappearance, and so on, until by doing so, this conceit, I am, eventually comes to be abolished as well. But so this is a non-returner speaking about this, but it could have as easily been a stream enterer. I still experience this, but I know I still experience the feeling I am. So you could read this particular suit if you were thinking, yeah, maybe I'm there. Let me see. Am I like Kamaka? Right. So what does he say? He says, I still have the attitude I am with respect to the 5 aggregates, although I do not see I am this with respect to them. I do not say I am this one or that one or another one and so forth. So that would be, and if you're like that, if you don't have any of that attachment, if you have a sense of who and what you are, but you don't believe in it as being self-existently real, then and that's don't believe in it at a very, very profound level. Because what happens in the process, when you come to understand it intellectually, then the feeling is still, pretty solidly there. The belief that, well, it still feels like somebody's experiencing this. It still feels like somebody's doing this. It still feels like there is a self here. Right? Even though intellectually you can say, well, I know that's not true. But then through meditation practice, you start to have the direct experience of there not being the self. The self, until you become convinced at the deepest level of your being that this is not true. And that's so the insight leads to awakening in this way. But remember, the awakening has to accomplish a few other things. It has to leave you without doubt, because you can have the sense that you can be convinced that there is no self in these 5 aggregates and become a nihilist, a materialist, and feel like, well, life is just this pointless thing, So that is the difference there. If you had seen ultimate reality, if you'd known nirvana, then you are not vulnerable in that way. So that's why this other fetter is an important one. It's not just enough. You also have to be beyond doubt. Now the interesting thing is, it seems that there's people who are beyond doubt, but they don't remember having looked behind the curtain. That's just the doubt's not there anymore. So
I'm just thinking, if you do a survey of Christians,
yeah.
and you ask them, do you have any doubts about your faith? I would say probably a good majority of them would say they have no doubt. But you know, how much no doubt is really no doubt?
Well, that's exactly right. How much no doubt is really no doubt?
Yeah.
That's, what does it take to shake your faith? And many Christians, their faith can be shaken, but there's some, I'm sure, that it can't. But this is different. This is coming from direct experience, from knowledge of something vastly, having not believing in something because you read about it or thought about it, but having an experience of something that is vastly beyond anything else you've ever experienced. And so that's pretty unshakable. So one last little thing that I do want to tell you about these 4 stages of enlightenment. They go by the name, the other name for stream entrance stage is 7 times returner. So we have 7 times returner, once returner, non-returner, and arhat. And oh, my recorder's not on.
That's okay, there's a backup.
There's a backup. Thank goodness.
The other one's on.
It is. I wonder why this one is not on.
That's okay. It is a backup. That's why it's good to have a backup.
It sure is. Hello in there. You're live. Oh, it says its memory is full.
Memory is full.
Memory full. Oh my goodness. I'll have to download it and get a copy from Scott here for my archives. Okay. The idea, as the way it's usually presented, is that the stream enterer, if he fails to become an arhat in this lifetime, will need at most to be reborn in this realm 7 times before they actually become an arhat. And the once returner needs to be reborn at most once. And the non-return, yeah?
At most once, that means it's possible that they won't even have it rebirth.
It's possible, yeah, at most. It's possible they'll become an arhat in this time.
Okay, I see.
And somebody who, let's put it this way, if you die as a once returner, then you get recycled. But if you die as a non-returner, you don't come back. You go to the special heaven that's reserved for non-returners, where there is a Buddha who will complete your training and you'll become an arhat there. Right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
That's
nice.
the teaching. But there is a little bit of conflict between this and the idea of there being really no self. You see that this terminology could make one believe that there's a self. So another way of interpreting this, and this fits with this, you'll find this fits with the description I already gave you. Somebody who is a stream enterer, the so-called 7 times returner, might lapse into the same kind of mental states and behaviors of suffering and unwholesome behavior several times and have to pull themselves back out of it in the course of their lifetime. So it means that they are still subject to occasional lapses. The once returner, that's an interesting thing. The once returner deliberately needs to go, they want to destroy the last vestiges of desire and aversion. So the path of the once returner to become a non-returner is to engage in the world in such a way that they expose the roots of their craving so that they can destroy it finally once and for all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What does that mean, expose the roots of their craving?
What's that?
What does that mean, expose?
That means that they are, the roots of their craving are exposed with the being in the world, in the sense realm, so that there will still be things that trigger craving. And so when trigger is craving, but now it's very, very weak because they were once returned. When craving is revealed because it's triggered, then, because it's weak, they can root it out.
What about being tortured? So maybe they will want to come back and be tortured by some kind of bad regime.
Maybe they would, do you think?
I don't know. I would.
But I'm trying to put this in the context of, of in one lifetime. That, trying to understand that, okay, a stream enterer is somebody who's still subject to lapses. A once returner isn't subject to the same kind of lapses, but they're still in the world, and they're still experiencing desire and aversion, and they have to be, because this is where they have to do the work. If your once returner was in a deva realm, they wouldn't get any work done. They wouldn't have any opportunity. They just experience all this bliss and satisfaction. So they've got to be in the sense realm where there are still those things to arouse the afflictions, so that they can recognize these afflictions in their weakened form and overcome them, and so become the non-returner. Now, the non-returner is free from craving. So in this lifetime, somebody that achieves the status of a non-returner no longer needs ever to return to the status of being subject to craving or being prone to unwholesome behaviors. They're beyond all that. So that's another way of understanding these terms 7 times once in non-returner. Okay? Now maybe the last little thing before we ever running out of time. We need another day on this retreat.
All right. Let's do another day. I'll call my boss.
I'll just give you a little more direction where you want to go in your insight practice. You want to come to understand as clearly as you can impermanence, emptiness, no self, and the suffering nature of the suffering that arises from clinging to things that are empty and impermanent. And at the same time, you want to develop powerful equanimity. Both your concentration practice and your mindfulness practice will result in very, very powerful equanimity. Because I said that it will, in order for you to be able to experience ultimate truth, your mind needs to stop fabricating the illusion, which is the curtain that obscures and keeps you from seeing things as they truly are. So what brings you to the point where your mind suddenly just stops creating the obscuration for a short period of time and allows you to penetrate and see ultimate truth is very, very strong equanimity, along with a very, very profound recognition of impermanence, emptiness, and suffering. When the 3 characteristics are right in the forefront of your awareness, and you have very strong equanimity, then when in the next moment your mind would produce another fantasy for you to live in, and another one, it comes to that point and it has no taste for it. You have to get yourself to the point where your mind has absolutely no taste for continuing this grasping. And so it doesn't grasp, and in that moment of non-grasping, this is when the reality, the ultimate reality becomes apparent. Equanimity is the opposite of craving. So to say you have equanimity means that you don't have that compulsion towards the pleasant and away from the unpleasant. To have equanimity means that you stop reacting to pleasant and unpleasant. It doesn't mean that things stop being pleasant and unpleasant, because they do. They continue to be just as pleasant and just as unpleasant as before. But you stop reacting to pleasant and unpleasant with craving and grasping, because equanimity is the opposite of craving. And so as your equanimity gets stronger and stronger and stronger, eventually there isn't any craving, and where there's no craving, there's no grasping, and where there's no grasping, there's no becoming. So you have a moment of being. Right?
Can you do like an example and life of equanimity.
An example of equanimity.
Concrete.
A concrete, well, to describe equanimity, well, when something happens that causes physical pain, for example, and you just find yourself completely accepting it with no resistance, that's equanimity. When something happens that brings great pleasure, and you find yourself accepting it with no attachment, no urge to hold on to it, no urge to have more of it. That's equanimity. There is when pleasure is present and the desire to continue it does not arise in your mind, or when pleasure is potential and the desire to pursue it does not arise in your mind, then that would be equanimity. When pain is present and there is no compulsion to eliminate it, that's equanimity. When pain is imminent and there is no compulsion to avoid it. Now, this doesn't mean that you might not still have reason and wisdom and say, oh, it makes sense to take my hand out of the fire. All right? But in more practical terms, what it feels like is that the ups and downs of ordinary daily life, moment-to-moment life, don't affect you. They stop affecting you. You stop reacting to them. Things have all day long, as you especially know this from being quiet and paying attention and sitting still, all day long there's all kinds of discomforts and pains of different kinds that come and go. Right? And you've seen your reactivity be stronger, and you've seen your reactivity be weaker towards those pains. And so it's the diminished reactivity that we're talking about that's equanimity. So the stronger the equanimity, the more the reactivity is diminished. And likewise, some of you I know have experienced this because you've talked to me about it in your meditation reports, is that the same thing with pleasure. You find yourself eating or experiencing something outside, and you'll find that although it's still pleasant, you don't have this desire. If it's something that tastes good, you don't feel that usual compulsion to hurry up and have another bite, or to wonder if when you finish what's on your plate, if there's going to be some left in the tray that you go back for it, that kind of thing. It's that diminished desire, positive reactivity in form of desire.
3 or 4 years ago, I asked about the ice cream.
Yeah.
You talk about pleasure, but not attaching to it. And if you were enjoying the ice cream, but then boom, it falls on the floor, and you don't mind.
No, you don't mind. You just on to the next thing.
It's actually kind of funny sometimes. It's like, when something bad happens, it's kind of funny. It's ironic. Oh, man. You laugh about it.
So as you practice, your equanimity will grow stronger. One effect of concentration is to produce very profound equanimity. The stronger, when you go into deep stages of concentration, and then you get up from meditation and you go out, you have much more equanimity. You don't react to the same degree. Yes.
Culadasa, just like if you use equanimity to practice on a cancer patient.
If you lose equanimity?
Use equanimity, like if I have cancer right now.
Yeah.
And when you talk about equanimity, I just accept I have cancer.
That's right.
But I'm not eager to go to see different doctor to do a chemical therapy or something.
Your wisdom will tell you to go see those.
Well, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't go and see just as many doctors and do something about it, but you wouldn't be compelled by the fear of dying. Instead, it would make sense. There's people in the world that depend on you and care about you. There's things that you can do in the world, so there's all kinds of good reasons to go ahead and see doctors. You see, there's an illusion that, well, if I had cancer, the only reason that I would go and seek care is because I would be afraid of dying. And that's not true. You've still got intelligence. You've still got wisdom. You still have purpose in the world. And you still have there's all kinds of good logical reasons. You don't need to be emotionally compelled to do it. Now, if there were no emotionally compelling reasons, then maybe, if there were no intellectual reasons and no emotions, then maybe you wouldn't. But then maybe that would be no problem too. But anyway, the point is that you want to have more and more equanimity, because the more equanimity you have, and the more clearly you are aware of the three characteristics, the more likely it is that at some point your mind is just going to stop for a minute, and the world's going to stop, and you're going to be able to see things as they really are. And this is actually why it's an accident, because, even if you haven't done a lot of practice to develop equanimity, and even if you don't have a deep understanding of the three characteristics, if for one reason or another your mind happens to come to that place where there just doesn't arise any tendency to grasp, to continue the reality in the next stage. In other words, if for whatever reason you just go into a state of being and not becoming, then the same thing can happen to you. I mentioned Eckhart Tolle to you the other night. He wrote a book, The Power of Now, and he's written another book since then. I can't remember the name.
The power of what? The mouth?
The Power of Now. The Power of Now. What's the name of his second book?
I just can't remember.
Okay, it doesn't matter, but...
Being here is now. Being here is now.
Being here is now.
Be Here Now, that was Ram.
Oh, Be Here Now is Ram Dass. But this is, I didn't mention the name of this book the other night. It doesn't matter though. The point is that, you see, he never practiced Buddhism. He was very, very depressed and miserable and suicidal, and this went on for a long, long time. And then one day, in the depths of his despair, something happened and his mind just stopped generating all of this stuff, and he became awakened. And so now he became a teacher. And he's trying to teach other people how to have the experience he had. But the disadvantage he has is that he didn't have his experience as a result of a systematic training. So he's giving a lot of talks and trying to come up with a way to lead people to have that experience.
But he's a really good teacher.
He's a really good teacher.
What's his name?
Eckhart Tolle. T-O-L-L-E is his last name.
Is he the virtual guy?
No, he's a real short, funny-looking guy. Looks funny, talks funny.
Well, he talks funny, but he's depressed. What the heck?
He's got big ears.
Sounds like Woody Allen.
They're not as big as mine. No. Anybody whose ears are as big as mine, I notice.
He doesn't write for He's very unusual.
Anyway, so that's the secret of the whole thing.
Absolute last question.
Yeah.
Since you're a person committed to telling the truth, I'd like to ask, do you think all of us
time's
have...
up.
Darn. This is my second. Do you think if we work diligently, all of us have the potential, the very, very good potential to achieve the first fruit in this lifetime?
Absolutely.
All of us.
Absolutely. Everyone.
And you're a man of
That's
who's deeply committed to the truth.
Everyone here has the potential. The only thing I would say, some people here, and I'm not saying who or anything else like that, there's some people here who don't yet realize just how much more diligent they might have to be. But, other than that, the diligence is a really important part of it. But if you're diligent, everybody in this room. And why stop at stream entry? There's nobody in this room who couldn't become an arhat. The only thing standing between you and becoming an arhat is how fully you put yourself into your practice. And if you want to know the truth, you can't decide and say, all right, that's it, I'm going to put myself fully into it. What you have to do is you have to go out there and feed this in every way you can every day from this moment on. So read things, go to Dharma talk, meditate more, learn more, practice more diligently, practice mindfulness in circumstances you thought it wasn't possible to practice mindfulness. But remember that what your 5 aggregates does in any moment, whether you choose the Dharma or the movie, is going to be determined by the kinds of mental formations that you accumulate. So what I'm saying is, if you want to have the kind of dedication and diligence that's necessary, then you've got to go and acquire the right influences. Hang around with other people whose primary interest is the Dharma. Listen to Dharma talks. Read books about Dharma. Meditate. Practice mindfulness.
So most importantly, surround yourself with Dharma friends, because as you said in the story you read, that is the whole practice. So if you have lots of, if you're surrounded by Dharma friends, you're there already. You're going to be there for sure.
Yes, that is
something to be calling every day.
Okay. I've told you before you could.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Culadasa, you say when you use mindfulness to watch movie, you are just watch, but you are not going inside. But my question is, how about when you read a book or study, how to use mindfulness?
Well,
because study or something you have to memorize, right? And you need to understand. So how can you use mindfulness to separate that?
You mean, are you asking me how do you practice mindfulness while you're reading a book? Oh, well, try it out. What you'll find is, of course, when your mind is fully engaged with reading the words and understanding the meaning, there's not much other, you don't have much other capacity of conscious awareness to be doing anything else. But if you practice mindfulness while you read a book, you'll find that between the top of the page and the bottom of the page, your mind goes a whole lot of other places and does a whole lot of other things.
So does that mean having introspective awareness when we read?
You can have introspective awareness.
Is that the same as mindfulness?
Right. So you read the first 3 lines, and your mind wanders off to something that has nothing to do with this wonderful sutra that you're reading. I mean, if you're mindful, you'll know that.
Or counting or whatever.
What?
Or what if you're studying something other than a sutra?
Oh, if you're studying, that's all right. If you're doesn't matter what you're reading. The thing is that if you notice what happens when you read a page from a book, if you think that you open the book and your mind is 100% totally focused on the words from the top of the page to the bottom, you better go back and check again, because I don't think that happens to any of you. Your mind wanders all over the place between the top of the page and the bottom. So there's a lot of scope for practicing mindfulness.
No wonder I never get those A's. I'm kidding. But that's the
So if nothing else, the practice of mindfulness will allow you to study more quickly and learn better, because it will reduce the amount of mind wandering. But also, sometimes the mind wandering is wholesome and sometimes it's unwholesome. You read something and it causes a thought, and so you're thinking about what you read, and it's wholesome and it's beneficial. But sometimes your mind just kind of drifts off and you really didn't understand the last sentence, but your mind's off doing something else. You know, if you have introspective awareness, you realize that and you bring your focus back to what you're doing. Yes?
What's the relationship between the 10 stages that you described and the jhanas?
The absorptions are a continuation. The jhanas are a continuation of the 10 stages. Well, actually, there are two kinds of jhanas. There are deep jhanas and light jhanas. To do the deep jhanas, you need to get to the 10th stage. To do the light jhanas, you can start those in the 7th stage, in the latter part of the 7th stage when you start having some joy, you know, some PT starts to arise. Then you can practice the light jhanas.